This week on Arizona Illustrated, we celebrate Architecture Week. A modernist with a sensitivity to the desert environment. San Javier del Bac's East Tower. Secrets revealed during the restoration of U of A's Old Main. And one man's community treasure is another's eyesore from the vault. First, we make the built environment, then the built environment makes us. So says Robert Miller, who's the director of the University of Arizona School of Architecture and president of the Southern Arizona chapter of the American Institute of Architects, or AIA. This week, the AIA is offering walking tours and other activities, inviting us to take a look at the cultural legacy that we've inherited and are building. On this episode of Arizona Illustrated, we'll show you buildings that are iconic, less known, even forgotten. And we begin with a story about a man who describes himself as an architect, an artist, and inventor. In fact, his legacy is influential and vibrant to this day, and his name is Arthur Brown.
My dad happened to be a very accomplished artist, and he went into architecture because he was afraid he couldn't earn a living as an artist.
I grew up here in the 1960s when Art Brown's buildings were everywhere. It was my dentist's office, it was my elementary school, they were the houses in my neighborhood, and it just feels right to me, like this is how things should be.
His buildings are quiet though, and so people sometimes will walk by a house like this and not realize that it's even designed by an architect. So sometimes you have to search to see what's really important about Art Brown.
Arthur T. Brown was born in the year 1900 in Tarkio, Missouri, to middle-class parents of moderate means. He was named after King Arthur. He first studied chemistry, then architecture, and in 1927 he moved to the biggest city he could think of, Chicago, Illinois.
So there's a very long tradition of modern architecture in Chicago, from Frank Lloyd Wright to Sullivan. Those are people that he was looking at, and he was starting to sort of try to figure out what he would do as he began his career as a young architect.
And 1929 was when the Depression hit, and so of course all major construction stopped.
After years of struggle in Chicago, in 1935, Arthur moved west to Arizona with his wife Caroline and 2 young children to find work in Phoenix. As the story goes, he arrived with only $40 in his pocket.
That might be true. It wasn't much money. I thought it was 20, but maybe it was 40.
A year later, they moved to Tucson, where he would stay till his death in 1993. In more than 50 years, he would design and build over 300 buildings and work on 1,500 projects in southern Arizona. He would be called a regional master, a pioneer, and would become Arizona's first fellow in the American Institute of Architects.
Even though the Depression cut short probably his career in Chicago, it brought him to Tucson at a really, really important time.
Art Brown was our first modernist at a time when most of the buildings being built were designed in revival styles. People were trying to give Tucson an old world feel.
He did not like the word style. He was offended when he heard that. He felt that architecture was problem solving, and he felt that a building, the best building, would grow out of the site where it was.
He was this unvarnished guy who used materials to create spaces in a very simple but elegant and subtly, deceptively sophisticated way.
This is the Ball Paler residence in Midtown Tucson, built in 1952. It was designed for 2 librarians at the University of Arizona who wanted an egalitarian home.
This house is large with ideas, and the clients, I think, believe that with this small envelope, the architect met all of their needs, because one of their needs was economy.
You don't need a style when you have all of these design determinants already. You have the site, you have the owner's budget, you have the owner's desires, and you'll want to orient the house for, usually it's a combination of things. You want a good view, you also want some solar features too.
As well as being a pioneering modernist architect in southern Arizona, he was also a solar pioneer. utilizing passive solar design for both heating and cooling very, very early, before it was well known or widely practiced.
The Rosenberg House, built in 1946, is a great example. This solar wall would absorb sunlight all day and heat the house during winter. The Rose School was called America's first public solar building. It got up to 80% of its heat from the solar roof. The Ball-Paler home uses a different method to control the climate.
He was known as an inventor, and he'd like to figure out ways to make active devices in the house that his clients could adjust. So in this case, they're adjusting these roller awnings.
The awnings can be adjusted to allow heat into the house during the winter and keep it out during the summer. Arthur used simple roof extensions to accomplish this on other projects.
And I think today, if people remember that, we could bring these devices back to a lot of homes, and they would be more logically suited to the place we live.
This was his modernist creed. He believed in doing things that made sense as an architect. He didn't do wacky, crazy things just for pure formalism. He did them because they were necessary.
Even though you can see some things that are stylistically unique to Art Brown, I think he arranged his palette of materials and the interior layout and its strategy for adapting to the desert to each client. And that makes everything unique.
Unique, like this home in Tubac, designed for World War II pilot Colonel Van Sicklen. It was designed to look good from the ground and the air. The colonel could park his airplane in this hangar, and then he could jump into the pool for a swim before going inside his home.
The exterior of every building should have a good center of interest that draws the eye to it. Just the rhythm makes a design nice. It's a little bit like music. You have notes and you have the rhythm of the music. This is a visual rhythm that you have.
Gordon Brown became an architect himself and worked with his father in this office for 25 years.
He never asked for work. He waited until it was given to him. He thought that all your clients should come by word of mouth from other satisfied clients. You have less trouble that way because they want you.
The University of Arizona wanted him to design these dorms on campus. They've been in use since the 1950s.
Generations of students have been to his dormitories. He also was famous for churches. He designed a lot of churches here in and around Tucson.
Arthur brought his modernist mentality and straightforward use of materials to every church he designed.
Here's the repetition that's part of design, and here's the center of interest, and here's the front entrance to the church.
You can still find examples of Arthur Brown's work in southern Arizona, but many of his buildings have been altered or demolished.
There was a time when Art Brown's architecture was very out of fashion. Right around the time Ronald Reagan got elected, we went into a very reactionary phase of architecture. We had postmodernism. Suddenly, historicist styles looked good to people again. Tucson General Hospital, which is a whole hospital, was only about 40 years old when it was completely destroyed. They saved the steel skeleton and reused that, but hung a whole new postmodern facade on it.
I think my dad was an architect's architect. He had a reason for all of the things he did.
He lived for most of the 20th century. I mean, he lived through 2 world wars, a Great Depression. He lived a very full, creative life, and he left a great legacy.
A lot of scholars, as they begin to look at this period and begin to understand the connection between the aesthetic ideals of modernism and the performance ideals of modernism, you start looking at people like Art Brown, and it becomes more and more important.
The reason Art Brown's buildings make you feel good is because of their openness and their simplicity and their directness. You just walk in and it's like you relax. You go, oh wow, this is great. There's good light, there's nice views, and he was just a really, really, really good architect.
Visit the Arizona Illustrated page on azpm.org to meet Howard Curtin, designer and builder of nearly 100 unique homes. Take an architectural tour of historic and beloved Bisbee and follow a Tucsonan with an artist eye for iconic local structures. And visit favorite places. 13 architects speak thoughtfully and personally about a favorite building, place, or space in southern Arizona. All available on the Arizona Illustrated page at azpm.org. Mission San Javier del Box. It's 10 miles south of downtown Tucson on the Tohono O'odham Indian Reservation. This mission was established by Father Eusebio Kino way back in 1692, and work began on the building in 1783. And to this day, it remains an active Catholic church. Now people come from all over the world to see this place, which is regarded as the highest expression of Spanish colonial architecture in the entire United States. But maintaining its structural integrity, you could say, is a mission all its own.
"81-year-old Sonny Morales is a third-generation Mason. He learned bricklaying from his father, and he learned this from his grandfather.
He says 3 things in life for you to live a long time. He says, eat 3 meals a day, he says, get your 8 hours of sleep, and work your butt up, because you were born on the poor side, and you work and you live a long time.
His son Daniel represents the 4th generation. He's the project manager for restoration efforts at the mission. The Morales family of Masons have worked to restore this 200-year-old church on and off for decades. Daniel took the reins when his father Sonny stepped down in 2000.
My father is still working with us part-time. You know, he does a few hours a day. He's still at it. He's always worked, you know, all his life. We get to work on something that's special to a lot of people. You know, people come from all over the world here and visit this place. And, you know, you see their expressions of what they see out here in the desert. You know, this monument that stands out.
It's special enough that government officials featured an artist's rendition of San Javier at the center of the Pima County seal, as did the city of Tucson.
We're actually putting in control joints now into the dome.
Morales led restoration work on the West Tower, which began in January of 2003. That work continued for 6 years at a cost of nearly $3 million. The scaffolding came down in December of 2008, just in time for Christmas concerts. It was also just in time for an economic downturn.
We found in many instances when Danny and his crew takes off a big chunk of cement, it's damp underneath, even though it hasn't rained for months.
Bob Vent has been the preservation architect at San Javier del Box for the past 25 years. He's worked with adobe structures in particular for nearly 30 years.
One thing we've learned is that you need to use ancient materials for ancient buildings. You can't use modern materials. They end up doing more harm than good.
While done with good intentions, efforts during the 1950s and 60s involved, among other things, the use of concrete and rubberized roofing paint, which failed.
With the cement, moisture gets inside and then it has no way to escape.
What we learned in the subsequent decades was that underneath this hard coat of cement and sand plaster that was applied, the old soft brick was being eaten up.
Vent's research has identified materials and methods of construction that are compatible with the mission and appropriate for its restoration.
We're returning to the traditional plaster of lime and sand and then lime washing it as a finish. The purpose of the lime and sand plaster is to provide a skin to protect the brick, but a breathing skin, one that's not going to trap moisture, and one that's not incompatible in terms of its hardness, its strength, its density. And that's where, again, we're maintaining that brilliant white appearance, which I think is part of why it's so impressive against the blue sky. It makes the sky look bluer.
The sand portion of the mixture comes from the Tohono O'odham Reservation, and there's one unusual ingredient with a local origin.
We're also adding in this folkloric ingredient, which is the nopal cactus mucilage, the famous cactus juice. And essentially it is a fluidifier. It makes the mortar handle better when the masons are putting on the wall. I believe what it does is it slows the drying time of the lime plaster. If it dries too quickly, it doesn't fully cure.
The restoration work is done by hand. It takes time and patience.
The head of our masonry crew, Danny Morales, I've been with him when he'll open up a piece of wall with a hammer and chisel, and just a spurt of red dust will come out because the the brick is disintegrated.
In this kind of work, you don't know what you're going to find, you know, until you open it up. And once you open it up, you know, sometimes you find something that's more damaged than you thought. You have to be very careful, because if you make the wrong move, you may take a few steps back.
It's been nearly 7 years since work finished on the West Tower. Now they plan to restore the East Tower. From afar, you can see the difference in the color between the two. Inside the East Tower, you can see its decline.
It's just a cornice that holds the ledge. It's in between the arch. It's in bad shape. I mean, it's got the concrete all over the floor. And this is paint right there. They had put some paint on it, or Tough Tex, I believe it was at the time.
This has taken us a long time, and you know, people say, well, why is it taking so long? You know, maybe it's time you should find a new architect.
The pace of the work is limited by the amount of money available. For the past 2 decades, that funding has come from donations to Patronato San Javier, a non-sectarian nonprofit organization founded by Southern Arizona community leaders. Their sole mission, to promote the restoration and preservation of Mission San Javier del Bac.
The Patronato has on hand about $800,000, which would get us through about 1.5 years of working with our crew. We have estimated it's a $3 million project, and we expect it to take 5 years.
Funds for the restoration don't commingle with the coffers of the Catholic parish at San Javier. The Patronato and the church are separate entities. It is, however, an active church where Mass is held each day and worshipers come to practice their faith.
Others come curious and just, whether Catholic or not, find a quiet place to sit and pray and think in their own way.
Father Stephen Barnofsky is a Franciscan friar and the pastor at San Javier. He embraces the confluence of people and cultures that make their way here.
One day there were some Buddhist monks in there, and they were just sitting and absorbing, I guess, and people from other faith traditions who just find it to be a peaceful place. You know, it's wonderful to have a historic building, but to still have that place functioning as a place for spiritual fulfillment is, to me, really important.
Morales and his crew have begun their work inside the East Tower. When that work is complete, scaffolding will go up on the exterior, and the restoration will continue. Mission San Javier del Bac is a recognized national landmark and the oldest building of European origin in the state of Arizona.
The mission, I think, also is significant not only because of its age, but because it was built on a frontier. This was at the edge of the known world. For the Spanish, it was the edge of their empire. I also think it's a symbol of community. It's the center of this village of Bac, San Javier del Bac. Bac is the Native American place name. But because it stands in isolation, you can still experience it. And I really feel that coming down to our mission, San Javier del Bac, is traveling back in time. It's like you can walk into the 18th century.
For architect Bob Vent, this iconic structure is nothing short of an inspiration.
Architecturally, it's spectacular. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful buildings anywhere, I think, on the face of the earth. And I mean, the proportions of it, the details of it, you know, it's got this beautiful verticality in the openings, the slenderness of the arches. So it really is I think, the ultimate work of architecture. And art. And let's not forget, architecture is art.
For Daniel Morales, the restoration has been a life's work. His son Vincent represents the 5th generation of Masons to practice their trade on the mission. Morales will have to hand over the reins someday.
Yes, I'll hand it down to my son Vincent currently, if he chooses to. If he chooses not to, well, maybe a grandchild or something.
Either way, he has faith in the mission's future.
Well, I'd like to see all of it get completed and then hopefully taken care of when I'm long gone.
Old Main is the University of Arizona's original building and the heart and soul of campus. In fact, this territorial style structure was still being built way back on October 1st of 1891 when the university opened its doors for the first time to only 32 students. Well, after 120 years of constant use, Old Main was really showing its age. So in 2013, a 16-month, $13.5 million restoration project was started. And we look back at that project now through a U of A produced video made while the work was still in full swing.
Probably after Sanavir Mission, Old Main is the most important building in southern Arizona. I don't think you'd get a lot of arguments about that. The importance of it relative to the University of Arizona and the importance of the University of Arizona to this community. And so when you get to work on that, that's spectacular when you get to work on a building that is not just important, but as we've worked on the building, we've come to understand what a great building it is, what a great building it is for this climate, for the U of A campus, for this community, and to get to kind of follow in the footsteps of the architect and builder who did that project in 1887 to 1891 is a privilege. How often do you get to do that? The way we practice architecture is very much tied to this place, a sense of place. And Tucson is a very demanding climate, and it's also a location with a big, long cultural history. And the buildings that we try to do that are contemporary buildings all need to respond to the desert environment and all need to be responsive to the culture of this place. And that's what I mean by sense of place. And people use it in terms of art, people use it in terms of music. It's the connection between an art form or a design and the location in which it's placed. So when we first started the project, there was this rumor floating around. And the rumor floating around was that the floor between the upper level and the lower level was filled with dirt. And we didn't know if that was true or not. It was a pretty strong rumor. And sure enough, the entire floor, about 12,000 square feet of floor between the first and second, has about 2.5 inches of dirt covering the entire space between the floor and the ceiling. And the reason they did that was for sound attenuation, that you had a wooden floor with a wooden structure sitting over classrooms. And people were worried that, as people walked on the floor, that the sound would reverberate down. And a good way to deaden sound is with a massive material, a heavy material. And so dirt was the perfect material to use. So when you opened up the floor, you were looking at all dirt. And we were looking at the floor after they took the dirt out, and we noticed that there were pieces every once in a while that were painted. And we couldn't figure out what that was until we took all those out and put them together in a puzzle. And it turned out it was the original construction sign with the name of the contractor on it. And they just cut that up in little pieces and used that for the shelving. What the architect James Creighton did is he understood that over the years this building was going to grow and change. The demands on it were going to change over time. And so what he built was a very simple structure, which it consists of a cruciform. And then he built 4 quadrants, 4 big rooms. And then he built 2 wings, north and south, which were all originally empty. And he designed that so that all of the people at the University of Arizona that followed could modify those spaces as they needed them over hundreds of years. And so our intent is to take this historic shell, make it back the way it was when it was first built, and then go in and fill in that shell with all brand new uses, with new technology and new offices and new furniture, and be able to tell the difference. So when you walk into Old Main, you will understand that you're looking at a modern interior in a historic building. I really feel honored to be part of kind of this next iteration, this next group of users that try to respect that original building. We had a really nice visit with President Hart, and we were standing in this big open space, and we were talking about, you know, the glass walls and the contemporary materials, and you know, I just turned to her and I said, you know, this gives me a little bit of goosebumps, because this is exactly what James Creighton intended us to do when he finished the building in 1891. He knew that 122 years later, folks would be in here doing exactly what we're doing.
What happens when an earnest attempt to save one community treasure threatens the very existence of another? Well, Tucsonans faced such a conundrum back in 1998, as we see in this episode of From the Vault.
Depending on your point of view, it's either a gem of modern desert architecture or a blemish on the landscape. Either way, the Blackwell House sits inside Tucson Mountain Park. It has since Pima County bought it in 1987 with bond money for park expansion. And that has led to 11 years of controversy, with the county finally recommending it be demolished sometime this summer.
A number of folks have complained to the board, complained to the department with regards to the visual intrusion that structure has on your trip, not only up into Gates Pass as you approach Tucson Mountain Park, as well as when you're at Gates Pass looking back towards the city.
The Blackwell House was built in 1979 for Jerry Blackwell, then an executive at Old Tucson Studios. Its architect is Judith Chafee, Yale-trained with an international reputation. Chafee says she spent months studying the site so the house could be built for passive heating and cooling and simplicity of building materials, mostly concrete and wood.
I think it will be remembered in modernist architecture as a kind of strange series of events.
The house was slated for demolition back in 1992, but a conservancy made up of admirers and University of Arizona architecture students cleaned up its debris and got a state heritage matching grant to preserve it. But the conservancy could not raise enough money to match the grant and lost it last December.
It's unfortunate that structure ended up in that location.
Of course, that's the irony. If the Blackwell House were located somewhere else, it would not be designed the way it is, making such a singular and controversial statement.
Thank you for joining us here on Arizona Illustrated. And for more information about Architecture Week-related walking tours, lectures, and other activities, visit the website of the American Institute of Architects at aiasouthern.arizona.org. And next week, 40 years of collecting at the U of A's Center for Creative Photography, getting a product from the lab to the market, the next generation to steward our national parks, and Dead Man's Curve from the Vault. I'm Tom McNamara. See you next week.